Hi guys, most of you have got online. I can see when I pull it up, when I look on Canvas, that you have done the assignment. Remember, I know this might be the first time for most of you that have taken an online class, but it's kind of difficult to take an online class if you don't log in and check the assignments. So for those of you, it's kind of funny, I'm sitting here saying for those of you that haven't done your assignments, you're not paying attention, you're going to miss it. So anyway, we'll worry about that when we get to it. I'm going to be posting a lot of these videos because you need to hear from me certain elements. Most of you did the assignment, you're doing fine. Some of you were a little confused, you sent me emails. Hopefully I got back to you. With inductive and deductive reasoning, I know it gets kind of confusing. I also placed on Canvas for you a fun video to watch. It's mainly for philosophy majors, but it kind of explains the difference between the two reasonings. And the reason you're going to see that this is important is clearly with inductive reasoning, I understand. You could be wrong, and many times we are wrong. Most detectives, most cops do not have a crystal ball. We're not going to know without a doubt that certain things happened. But we do the best that we can. We try and make victims whole again by correcting things that have happened. Sometimes we're wrong. Certainly, we're going to be wrong using inductive reasoning, but the problem is when you use deductive reasoning, you can have a lot of things that occur in a crime scene that you overlook. And once you break down a crime scene, it's gone forever. You can never go back and get some of this evidence, and we'll talk about that today. For those of you that remember Kurt Cobain from Nirvana, that was kind of the thing that they had to deal with. The lead singer of Nirvana in Seattle, when the detectives got there and they looked at that crime scene, they immediately jumped into the conclusion or the premise that this is a suicide. And in doing that, they went out and tried to prove that they were right, and the investigation was handled very quickly because they were convinced it was a suicide. And to this day, we're not really going to know. A lot of you can go online and watch all kinds of movies. There's a lot of conspiracy theories that he was killed by somebody. It wasn't a suicide. The point being here is that the crime scene was taken down, evidence was destroyed, and we really can't go back and relook at things because we don't have them any longer. If that's of interest to you, go online and you can watch. But that's a classic example of deductive reasoning and going in and just not looking at everything as a whole. So I'd rather be wrong when we talk about a syllogism, meaning that there's times that we might be wrong, but at least we have all the evidence that we've looked at. So it's an extremely important concept. Watch the video. I'm going to give you 5 points just for watching the video. I think she explains it in a way that I probably can't. It's a little bit more clear. And this really applies to criminal justice, and you'll see as we move forward. The second thing I want you to make sure you do, I did an announcement about the attendance quiz. If you don't get online and do that quiz, and a lot of you have not done the quiz, then the registrar might drop you from the class. It could affect your financial aid. It can affect a lot of things. So get online. It's one thing not to do an assignment, whole nother thing if you don't do this attendance quiz. Make sure you do the attendance quiz. Okay, having said that, I'm going to go back and I'm going to talk about a few things that I want you to know. I hope you're reading chapter 1, following along with my lecture, but I'm going to highlight a couple of things that always come up in my face-to-face classes that seem to be confusing. The first is two concepts. The first is criminalistics. The second is forensics. For those of you that have asked me, hey, I'm interested in this field, I want to do this for my career, they're two different jobs. When we talk about criminalistics, someone that does criminalistics, unlike what the movie does, the CSI, that whole CSI criminalistics, this person is a specialist in interpreting evidence. They're not a scientist. They're just good at going to crime scenes, and they're very good at helping the detective figure out what's happening in that crime. The problem with criminalistics, most of your CSI folks that we hire for police departments, most of those are very low-paying jobs. They don't make a lot of money. So although it might be fun and exciting, they just don't make a lot of money. This is opposed to forensics. When we talk about forensics, this is completely, you're a scientist. You're a scientist in the field of study. You're a scientist and you understand ballistics, fingerprinting, and the forensic scientists, their job is to use science to solve a legal problem. And in doing that, we're going to pay them a lot more money. So if you want to be paid well and you want to deal with crime and forensics, then what I would suggest to you is go and get a hard science degree. You know, criminal justice is not where you want to be. Go get a biology degree. Get a degree in a field of study of science that makes you an expert. That's where you're going to make the money, as opposed to being just a criminalistics. You know, if you want to be involved in crime and make money, become a scientist. I can get you a job in criminalistics, but it's not going to be a high-paying job. So know the difference between those two. A couple of things that I want you to know. Dates. I normally don't ask you to remember dates, but these are pretty important dates. In 1967, and I hope it's mentioned in the book, this is where the FBI created the NCIC. NCIC, the National Crime Information Center. This was an important time because we were able to use computers to track property and all kinds of things, from guns to people, across the United States and worldwide. So if a gun was used in New Jersey in a crime and we find that gun in Las Vegas, we can now run that gun in a computer and we can track it back to an original crime scene. It was an extremely important step in solving crimes. It made our job a lot easier. So remember, 1967 is when NCIC became important. The next one is 1970. Again, the FBI created this behavioral science unit. It was that criminal profiling. I didn't say racial profiling, criminal profiling, completely different. At this time, the FBI started putting statistics together to where we could start noticing that particular modes of operation, people committing crime, did a certain pattern. And that's all we're trying to do, is we're trying to identify patterns. Remember, this is inductive reasoning. I'm trying to identify patterns of behavior that in the past, when I've seen this, this is what generally the outcome has been. So 1970, this behavioral unit became extremely important. So having said that, let's now start talking about, and the book does a pretty good job on what makes a good investigator. How do you become a good investigator? Well, I want you to know that in my opinion, and it's closely mimics what the book's saying, that there are really three things that makes you a good investigator. The first and foremost is that you have to be culturally adroit. That's ADROIT. Culturally adroit means that you understand cultures, that you understand people, and you understand all kinds of different, whether it's races, religion, ethnic backgrounds, because you're going to be going into their houses at a time, probably the worst moment of their life, helping them through something, and you must be able to, number one, identify, what can be seen as, to them at least, as this is inappropriate. You shouldn't be doing this. I don't want you to be doing things in people's houses that's going to offend them. So be very culturally adroit and understand people when you're in their houses. And obviously, number two is those communication skills. You must be extremely adept at communicating with people, not only to help comfort the victims, but you'll find in most cases the suspect is in that house as well. You have to be good at understanding who the potential suspects might be in these particular cases. And then third is you have to have attention to tedious tasks. You have to understand these tedious tasks are going to help you deal with this overall picture when you start putting a case together. So this is what makes a good investigator. This is different than the goals of an investigator. The goals of an investigator are completely different. Number one goal of investigator is, did a crime occur? You have to go in there and decide, did a crime occur? Secondly, you have to go in there and identify people that are responsible. Third, you have to eventually try and arrest somebody that did this crime. And then fourth, you have to present the best case that you can in front of the district attorney. And that's critically important. It doesn't matter how good you are at everything else. If you can't put this together in a case and give it to the district attorney, then you haven't done your job. So these are the goals of the investigator. This is what you're supposed to do. If I'm going to hire you to become a homicide detective or a robbery detective, these are the things that you have to do, your job. But don't overlook what your duties are. So when I ask you a question, what are the duties of an investigator? 2 duties of an investigator. Number 1, provide emergency to people. I don't care about arresting people. That comes secondary. You have to help people, render aid. First duty is to make sure people in that crime scene are okay. The second one is you need to secure that crime scene. We're going to go on and on about crime scenes. They're extremely important. We found this out in the O.J. Simpson case. We found it out in the Casey Anthony case. Making sure that your crime scene is safe from being contaminated is the number one thing after you render aid. And when I talk about contamination of crime scenes, and I'm going to be testing you on this, it goes back to Locard's principle of exchange. Locard, L-O-C-A-R-D-S. It'll be in your book. The Locard's principle of exchange says that when 2 things come into contact with one another, they always leave behind some sort of evidence. It's extremely important to understand. And so understanding that, you'll realize that in a crime scene, we have to make sure that we preserve that evidence. So really look at Locard's principle of exchange and understand what the goals of being an investigator are, your duties, and what I think it is to become, and what those traits or qualities of a good investigator are. If you have questions, send me an email. But again, watch this video. It'll help tie in some of the concepts. Friday, I'll give you another video to kind of finish up chapter 1 and give you some important things that hopefully most of you had in 1010 class, but I know some of you are taking this class that haven't taken 1010 that I have let in. So I'm going to have to go back and kind of just refresh for some of you your memory from 1010. For some of you it will be new, and we'll do that Friday. See you next time. Be safe.